Her slap cracked through the air like a gunshot. The entire hall went dead silent. 130 pairs of eyes turned toward us, a sea of dress blues frozen in collective shock. I stood perfectly still, my right cheek burning not just from the impact, but from the humiliation that radiated through my body like wildfire. We were in the ceremony hall at Fort Lexington, Virginia, for the annual memorial recognition ceremony. The room was immaculate. Polished oak floors, high ceilings with crystal chandeliers, and walls adorned with the photographs of fallen heroes. American flags flanked the podium, and the scent of furniture polish mingled with cologne and perfume in the air-conditioned space. I was Staff Sergeant Rachel Morgan, combat medic, daughter of the late Colonel John Morgan. I stood there in my full dress blues, my father's posthumously awarded Bronze Star and Purple Heart, nestled in the small velvet box I clutched in my trembling hands. And across from me, her manicured finger still pointing accusingly at my face, stood Linda Granger, the commanding officer's wife. "You have no right to those medals," she seethed, her voice carrying through the shocked. "Silence. Your father served under my husband. They belong to his legacy. Hand them over." My fingers tightened around the velvet box. My father's medals, the physical symbols of his sacrifice, of his honor, the only tangible pieces of him I had left. "Mrs. Granger," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart. "These medals were awarded to my father. They were left to me in his will." Her eyes narrowed, perfectly made-up face contorting with rage. "You're just a staff sergeant. He was a colonel," she hissed. "You think you deserve to keep those medals? Give them to someone who earned them." From the corner of my eye, I could see Colonel Granger, his face impassive, saying nothing. Not a single officer moved to intervene. The crowd of decorated soldiers, officers, cadets, veterans, remained frozen, as if witnessing a car crash in slow motion. When I didn't respond, she stepped closer. I could smell her expensive perfume, see the flecks of gold in her irises as she glared at me. "Those medals belong on the legacy wall," she said, "not gathering dust in your pathetic apartment." "My father's medals stay with me," I replied, surprised at the steadiness in my voice. That's when it happened. She stepped forward, her arm swinging with unexpected speed. The crack of her palm against my cheek echoed through the hall. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some soldiers turned their heads. Others stared at the floor, frozen in shame. The sting spread across my face, but I refused to touch it, refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me react. I simply looked her straight in the eyes, letting the silence between us speak volumes. "You just made a mistake," I finally said, my voice quiet but clear. "One you're going to regret." I turned on my heel, my polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor as I walked toward the exit. No one tried to stop me, no one said a word. The only sounds were my footsteps and the soft rustle of my uniform. Outside in the corridor, I pulled my phone from my pocket, my hands shaking slightly as I scrolled through my contacts. I found the number I needed and pressed call. He answered on the second ring. "Michael," I said, "I need your help. Bring everything. We're going to need the general himself." Master Sergeant Michael Ramirez had been my father's best friend. He knew everything, things even I didn't know about my father's service. If anyone could help me now, it was him. "What happened, Rachel?" His voice was instantly alert, concerned. "Linda Granger just slapped me in front of the entire memorial ceremony. She's demanding Dad's medals." There was a pause. Then, "I'll be there in 30. Don't go anywhere." I leaned against the wall, trying to gather myself. My mind drifted back to my father, his steady presence, his quiet dignity, his unwavering moral compass. I could almost hear his voice. "Stand tall, Rachel. Honor isn't given, it's guarded." My father had raised me since I was 12, after my mother passed away from cancer. He'd been both mother and father, showing me what it meant to live with integrity even when no one was watching. When I joined the army at 18, following in his footsteps, he'd been prouder than I'd ever seen him. Not because I was continuing the Morgan military tradition, but because I was choosing a path of service. Now here I was, 8 years later, holding the medals that had been posthumously awarded after he died in Afghanistan, medals that Linda Granger believed should be displayed in her husband's legacy wall, a trophy case of accomplishments, many of which weren't even his to claim. I touched my cheek gently, feeling the heat still radiating from where she'd struck me. The physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation, the injustice of it all. My father had died serving his country, and now his memory was being used in some twisted power play. Outside the building, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parade grounds. I watched young cadets marching in the distance, their movements precise and synchronized. How many of them would face moments like this in their careers? Moments when standing up for what was right meant standing alone. 25 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. Michael stepped out, followed by an older man whose very presence seemed to command respect. General Franklin Rhodes, tall and distinguished with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. Rhodes had been my father's commanding officer years ago. He wore his full dress uniform, adorned with rows of medals that spoke of decades of distinguished service. "Staff Sergeant Morgan," he said, his voice gentle but authoritative. I snapped to attention. "General Rhodes, sir." "At ease, Rachel." He placed a hand on my shoulder. Michael filled me in. "I've brought the original commendations, the DOD letter, and—" He paused, his expression hardening slightly. "The classified file. It's time Colonel Granger faced the truth." Michael handed me a handkerchief. Only then did I realize there were tears streaming down my face. I wiped them away quickly, straightening my uniform. "Are you ready?" General Rhodes asked. I nodded, squaring my shoulders and lifting my chin. "Then let's set the record straight." As we walked back toward the ceremony hall, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about my father's legacy, about truth, about honor, the very things he'd lived and died for. The heavy double doors loomed before us. I took a deep breath, then pushed them open. The double doors swung open with a resonant creak, and every head in the ceremony hall turned in unison. The speech that had been in progress faltered and died as General Franklin Rhodes entered, followed by Master Sergeant Ramirez and myself. The silence that fell was profound, a heavy, expectant hush that seemed to press against my eardrums. Colonel Granger, who had been standing near the podium, visibly stiffened. Linda, seated in the front row, turned to look at us with a mixture of confusion and disdain, her composure momentarily shaken by the unexpected interruption. General Rhodes moved with deliberate steps down the center aisle, his presence commanding respect with every inch of ground he covered. I followed a few steps behind, feeling the weight of 130 pairs of eyes tracking our progress. My cheek still stung from Linda's slap, but I held my head high, the velvet box containing my father's medals clutched securely in my hand. "Colonel Granger," General Rhodes said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall without the need for amplification. "I believe we have a situation that requires immediate attention." Colonel Granger straightened, offering a salute that the general returned. "General Rhodes, this is unexpected. We're in the middle of a ceremony." "Yes, a ceremony to honor fallen heroes," General Rhodes replied, his tone measured but edged with steel, "which makes what I've heard all the more disturbing." My mind drifted back as they spoke, remembering how I had arrived at this moment. The path that had led me here began long before today's ceremony. I was 12 when my mother died. Cancer took her slowly, then all at once. My father, Colonel John Morgan, had been serving overseas when she was diagnosed. He came home immediately, took leave, and never left her side. After she was gone, it was just the two of us in our modest house near the base. He could have returned to active deployment, but he requested a position at Fort Lexington instead, determined to raise me himself. "Family first, Rachel," he told me one night as we sat on our back porch, staring at the stars. "The army is important, but some things matter more." Despite staying stateside, my father was respected throughout the military community. He'd earned his reputation through action, not words, leading dangerous missions, saving lives, making difficult decisions that others couldn't or wouldn't make. He never spoke of these things to me directly, but I overheard enough conversations, saw enough respectful nods from other soldiers, to understand the weight of the name Morgan. He taught me to shoot when I was 14, to drive when I was 15, and to stand my ground when I was 16, and a group of girls at school thought the army brat would be an easy target. I wasn't. "Honor, integrity, service," he would say. "These aren't just words, Rachel. They're a way of life." When I joined the army at 18, he didn't try to talk me out of it, though I saw the worry in his eyes. Instead, he helped me train, prepare, and understand what I was getting myself into. I became a combat medic, not because I wanted to follow directly in his footsteps, but because I wanted to help people in my own way. I first met the Grangers 3 years into my service. Colonel Edward Granger had just been assigned as the base commander at Fort Lexington, and his wife Linda immediately established herself as the unofficial First Lady of the base. She organized events, chaired committees, and made it clear that her social influence extended as far as her husband's military authority. My father, by then an advisor on special operations, maintained a respectful but distant relationship with Colonel Granger. "He's a good officer on paper," he once told me privately, "but I've seen men like him before. They climb over others to reach the top, then forget who helped them get there." Linda Granger seemed to take a special interest in me from the beginning, not in a mentoring way, but in the way a predator watches potential prey. Her questions always felt like tests, her compliments backhanded. "It must be so difficult," she said at one function, sipping champagne while eyeing my service uniform. "Trying to live up to your father's reputation, especially as, well, you know." She'd gestured vaguely at me, as if my gender was some kind of disability in uniform. "My father died when I was 23. A covert operation in Afghanistan went wrong. The details were classified, but I was told he saved his entire unit before he was killed. The Bronze Star and Purple Heart were awarded posthumously. General Rhodes himself delivered them to me, along with a letter that my father had written in case of his death. Rachel, if you're reading this, I'm sorry I couldn't come home to you. Know that I did my duty as I've always tried to do. These medals don't belong to the army or to history. They belong to you. You're my legacy, not these pieces of metal. Live with honor. I love you. Dad." 6 months after his death, Linda Granger approached me at a base function. "Rachel, dear," she said, her voice honeyed but her eyes cold. "Edward and I were thinking, your father's medals would make a wonderful addition to the legacy wall we're creating, a tribute to Fort Lexington's finest." I declined politely. The medals were all I had left of him. She persisted over the following months. Notes, calls, casual suggestions that became increasingly pointed. Then came the pressure, subtle at first, then less so. I was passed over for training opportunities. My performance reviews, while still positive, contained vague comments about attitude and integration with the unit. Colonel Granger called me into his office one day. "Staff Sergeant Morgan," he said, "I understand you've been uncooperative regarding your father's medals." "Sir, those medals were left to me personally," I replied. He leaned back in his chair. "Your father was under my command, Morgan. His achievements reflect on this base, on my leadership. Those medals belong in a place where they can inspire others. With all due respect, sir, they weren't left to the base. They were left to me." His expression hardened. "Consider your future in this army, Morgan. Your career path could go many ways from here. I'd hate to see you make choices that limit your potential." I was being threatened, and we both knew it. Now, standing in the ceremony hall with General Rhodes beside me, watching Colonel Granger's confident facade begin to crack, I felt the weight of those past interactions. This wasn't just about today's slap. It was about years of subtle intimidation, of attempting to erase my father's wishes, of trying to claim his legacy for their own. General Rhodes placed a leather portfolio on the podium. "Colonel Granger, Mrs. Granger," he said, his voice resonating through the silent hall, "I understand there's been an incident regarding Colonel John Morgan's posthumous medals." Linda rose from her seat, her composure regained. "General, with all due respect, this is hardly the time or place." "On the contrary, Mrs. Granger," he interrupted, smoothly. "Since you chose to publicly assault Staff Sergeant Morgan over these medals, I believe this is exactly the time and place to address it." He opened the portfolio and removed several documents. "I have here the original commendation for Colonel Morgan's Bronze Star and Purple Heart. I also have his will, legally executed and notarized, specifically bequeathing these medals to his daughter, Rachel Morgan." He looked up, his gaze sweeping the room. "But more importantly, I have something else, something that Colonel Granger has kept from this base, from his subordinates, and from Staff Sergeant Morgan herself." I felt my breath catch. This was something Michael hadn't mentioned. General Rhodes removed a sealed folder marked "Classified" in bold red letters. "The truth about how Colonel John Morgan died," he said, "and who he died saving." The classified folder in General Rhodes's hands seemed to pulse with an energy of its own. Every eye in the hall was fixed on those red letters, classified, as if they might rearrange themselves to reveal their secrets. Colonel Granger's face had gone pale. He stepped forward, his voice lowered but urgent. "General Rhodes, that file is sealed for a reason. This isn't the appropriate venue. I've been authorized to declassify portions of this file." General Rhodes cut him off, his voice firm. "By the Secretary of Defense himself, when I informed him of today's incident." Linda Granger's confident demeanor faltered for the first time. She glanced at her husband, confusion and the first flickers of fear crossing her features. General Rhodes turned to address the room. 6 years ago, a covert operation in Afghanistan went tragically wrong. Intelligence had identified a high-value target in a remote village near the Pakistan border. A special operations team was deployed to extract this target. Colonel John Morgan was attached to this team as a strategic advisor. He paused, his eyes finding mine for a brief moment. I nodded slightly, giving him permission to continue. This was my father's story. I had a right to know, and so did everyone else in this room. What the team didn't know, he continued, was that their intelligence had been compromised. They walked into an ambush. He flipped open the file and began reading directly from the report. At 0300 hours, the team came under heavy fire from elevated positions. The unit commander, he looked up, his eyes boring into Colonel Granger. Then Major Edward Granger was severely wounded in the initial assault. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I felt my heart pounding against my ribs. This was information I'd never been given. The team was pinned down, communication lines severed, General Rhodes continued. Colonel Morgan took command. He established a defensive position, stabilized the wounded, and coordinated a counter-assault that created an extraction window. During the final phase of the evacuation, Colonel Morgan personally provided cover fire, allowing the wounded, including Major Granger, to reach the extraction point. General Rhodes turned a page. Colonel Morgan was hit by enemy fire while ensuring the last team member made it to safety. He died on the field. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy with the weight of sacrifice. Colonel Morgan was posthumously awarded the Bronze Star with Valor and the Purple Heart, General Rhodes said. Medals that were rightfully passed to his daughter, as specified in his will. He closed the file. What isn't in this report, but what everyone in this room should know, is that Colonel Granger owes his life to John Morgan, a fact he has never publicly acknowledged. I stood perfectly still, processing this revelation. My father had died saving Colonel Granger, the man who had threatened my career, who had allowed his wife to publicly humiliate me, owed his life to my father. The irony was almost too much to bear. General Rhodes wasn't finished. Furthermore, the intelligence failure that led to this ambush was a result of procedural violations that trace back to then Major Granger's command decisions. Colonel Granger stepped forward, his face flushed now. "That's not fair, sir. The intelligence we received was questioned by Colonel Morgan," General Rhodes finished for him, pulling out another document. "I have here his written advisement, submitted 12 hours before the operation, expressing concerns about the reliability of the source, concerns that were dismissed. I remembered my father's voice from years ago. Sometimes, Rachel, the hardest thing about leadership is admitting when you're wrong. Had Colonel Granger ever learned that lesson?" Linda Granger suddenly pushed past her husband, her composure entirely broken. "This is absurd. You can't possibly hold Edward responsible after all these years. He was wounded. He was a hero." "No, Mrs. Granger," I said, finding my voice at last. "My father was the hero. Your husband was the one who got his men ambushed, then got saved by the man whose memory you just dishonored." She turned on me, rage contorting her features. "You little—" "That's enough, Linda." "Colonel." Granger grabbed his wife's arm, pulling her back. For the first time I saw fear in his eyes, not fear of the general or the revelations, but fear of what else his wife might say, might do. General Rhodes placed the documents back in the portfolio. "Colonel Granger, in light of these events and your failure to intervene when your wife assaulted a uniformed service member, you are hereby placed on administrative leave pending a full review. Staff Sergeant Morgan, on behalf of the United States Army, I apologize for the disrespect shown to you and to your father's memory today." He turned to the assembled soldiers. "This ceremony was meant to honor fallen heroes. There is no greater example of heroism than Colonel John Morgan's final act, giving his life so others could live, including those who never acknowledged his sacrifice." The weight of his words settled over the room. I saw veterans in the back straighten their shoulders, some wiping tears from their eyes. Younger soldiers looked at me with new understanding, new respect. Linda Granger was being quietly escorted toward a side exit by a pair of MPs who had entered during the General's revelation. Colonel Granger stood alone. Near the podium, the man who had wielded so much power over me now looking diminished, exposed. General Rhodes turned to me. "Staff Sergeant Morgan, I believe these belong to you." He gestured to the velvet box in my hands. "Would you like to say a few words?" I hadn't expected this. I looked down at the box, then at the faces turned toward me. These weren't just medals anymore, they were the physical manifestation of a truth long hidden, a truth that needed to be spoken. I stepped up to the podium, my father's medals held carefully in my hands. The microphone amplified my slightly shaky breath as I gathered my thoughts. "My father," I began, "didn't serve for medals. He served for meaning." I paused, feeling the truth of those words settle within me. What you saw today wasn't about me, it wasn't even about these medals. It was about honoring the truth, a truth that doesn't require permission to be told. I opened the velvet box, the medals gleaming under the hall's lights. "Honor isn't given," I said, echoing my father's words from years ago. "It's guarded. Today we all stand guard for a man who can no longer speak for himself." As I stepped away from the podium, a spontaneous salute rippled through the crowd. Officers, enlisted personnel, veterans, all paying respect not to me, but to the memory of Colonel John Morgan. A memory that would no longer be distorted by those who sought to claim it as their own. I returned to General Rhodes's side, feeling something shift within me, a weight lifting, a wound beginning to heal. My father's legacy wasn't in these medals or in anyone's legacy wall. It lived in the truth, finally spoken aloud. The ceremony hall emptied slowly, like a theater after a particularly moving film. People lingered, speaking in hushed tones, occasionally glancing in my direction, with expressions ranging from sympathy to admiration. I stood near the side entrance, the velvet box containing my father's medals clasped in my hands, acknowledging the respectful nods with slight smiles that didn't quite reach my eyes. I was emotionally drained, riding the aftershocks of adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation. Part of me still couldn't believe what had happened. Not just Linda Granger's slap, but the revelations that followed, the public unmasking of truths long buried. General Rhodes approached. Michael. Ramirez at his side. "Rachel," the general said, his formal demeanor softening slightly. "Let's step outside." I followed them to a small garden area behind the ceremony hall, a quiet space with benches arranged around a simple fountain. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured grass, and the sound of flowing water provided a soothing counterpoint to the tension still lingering in my shoulders. "You handled yourself with remarkable composure in there," General Rhodes said once we were seated. "Thank you, sir." I stared at the velvet box in my lap. "I still can't believe all this time." "Your father never wanted you to know," Michael said gently. "He didn't want you to carry the weight of how he died. He just wanted you to know that he did his duty." "But, Colonel Granger," I shook my head. He knew, and he still tried to take these medals." General Rhodes sighed. "Power does strange things to people, Rachel. Some rise to it, like your father. Others are corrupted by it." "What happens to him now?" I asked. "The administrative review will be thorough," the general replied. "His actions and inactions today were unacceptable. Combined with these revelations about the Afghanistan operation, his career is effectively over." I felt no satisfaction at this news, only a profound weariness. "And Mrs. Granger?" "She's been escorted off base," Michael said. "She'll be barred from all military functions moving forward. Assaulting a uniformed service member isn't taken lightly." We sat in silence for a moment, the reality of what had transpired settling around us like autumn leaves. "There's something else you should know," General Rhodes said finally, reaching into his inner pocket. "Something I've been holding on to for 6 years, waiting for the right moment." He withdrew an envelope, yellowed slightly with age, my name written across the front in my father's unmistakable handwriting. "Your father gave me this before that." "Final mission," he explained, handing it to me. "He said I'd know when to give it to you. I think today is that day." My fingers trembled as I took the envelope. "You've had this all this time?" He nodded. "John had a premonition about that mission. He tried to stop it, as you now know. When he couldn't, he prepared for the worst. I stared at the envelope, afraid to open it, afraid of what final words my father might have left for me that I hadn't yet heard. "We'll give you some privacy," Michael said, standing. "No," I said quickly. "Please stay, both of you. You were his friends, his brothers in arms." They nodded, settling back onto the bench as I carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Rachel," I read aloud, my voice catching on his words. "If you're reading this, then I didn't make it back, and General Rhodes has determined you're ready for the whole truth. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything myself. Some missions don't come with guarantees of return tickets. There's something about this operation that doesn't sit right with me. I've voiced my concerns, but we're moving forward anyway. That's the job. Sometimes you follow orders, even when your gut tells you otherwise. If I don't come back, there will be official reports, sanitized stories. You might never know exactly what happened, and maybe that's for the best. But know this, whatever happened, I did my duty. I protected my men. That's what matters in the end. I've asked Rhodes to look out for you. He's a good man, one of the best I've known in this army. Trust him like I did. These last 5 years raising you alone have been the greatest honor of my life. Watching you grow into such a strong, principled young woman has made me prouder than any medal or commendation ever could. Remember what I taught you. Honor isn't given, it's guarded. Stand tall. Speak truth. Do what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. You are my legacy, Rachel. Not medals, not mission reports, not war stories. I love you infinitely, Dad. I lowered the letter, tears streaming freely down my face now. No one spoke. The only sounds were the gentle splashing of the fountain and my uneven breathing as I tried to compose myself. "He knew," I said finally. "He knew something was wrong with that mission." General Rhodes nodded. John had exceptional instincts, but the operation had been approved at the highest levels. Not even I could stop it. Would it have made a difference, I asked, if they'd listened to him? "Almost certainly," the general replied. "Your father rarely raised concerns without reason." I folded the letter carefully, placing it back in the envelope. "Thank you for keeping this, for coming today, for telling the truth." The truth was long. "Overdue," Michael said. "I'm just sorry it took this to bring it to light." I touched my cheek. The sting of Linda Granger's slap now faded to a dull memory. Maybe it had to happen this way. Maybe this was how the truth needed to come out. General Rhodes placed a hand on my shoulder. "Your father would be proud of how you handled yourself today, Rachel. You showed the same courage and dignity that defined him." "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends on you," he replied. "But I have a proposition if you're interested. We need someone with your integrity to help train our new officers in military ethics and honor code. Someone who understands what those words truly mean." I blinked in surprise. "Sir, a promotion to Sergeant First Class would accompany the position." He continued. "Consider it less an offer and more a recognition of qualities you've already demonstrated." I thought about it. Teaching others about honor, about integrity, carrying forward not just my father's memory, but the principles he lived by. It felt right. "I'd be honored, sir," I said. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the garden, I felt something settle within me. The day's events had been painful, even traumatic, but they had also been clarifying, like a forest fire that clears away dead wood to make room for new growth. My father's letter rested against my heart, his medals safe in my hands. The truth of his final acts was now known, his sacrifice acknowledged, and I had found my own path forward, not defined by his shadow or by the petty machinations of the Grangers, but by the principles we shared. Honor isn't given, it's guarded, and today I had stood guard. 6 months passed like the changing of seasons, gradually, then all at once. Fall turned to winter, winter to spring. Fort Lexington transformed from a place of painful memories to something new, something different. Not quite home, but no longer hostile territory. The promotion to sergeant. First class came through as General Rhodes had promised. My new position in military ethics and honor code training gave me purpose beyond what I'd found as a combat medic. I was helping shape the next generation of officers, teaching them that leadership wasn't about rank or privilege, but responsibility and integrity. Colonel Granger's administrative review had concluded as expected. He'd been forced into early retirement. his career ending not with a celebration of service, but with the quiet shame of misconduct. Linda Granger had disappeared from military social circles entirely, retreating to their vacation home in Florida, according to base gossip. I rarely thought about them anymore. The anger that had once burned so hot had cooled, hardened, transformed into something else. A quiet determination to honor my father's legacy through my own actions, not through dwelling on past injustices. My apartment near the base became a sanctuary. Simple, modest, but mine. My father's medals rested in a glass case on my bookshelf, not hidden away, but not ostentatiously displayed either, just present like his memory. On a rainy April morning, I was reviewing curriculum materials for an upcoming seminar when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Michael Ramirez. "Rachel," he said when I answered, his voice warm. "How are you holding up?" "I'm good, Michael. Really good." I looked out the window at the rain streaming down the glass. "How's retirement treating you?" He laughed. "Can't complain. Sarah's got me renovating half the house. Says I need to stay busy. Smart woman." "Listen," he continued, his tone shifting slightly. "I'm calling because there's someone who wants to meet you. A Captain James Holden. He was part of your father's unit in Afghanistan." I sat up straighter. "Part of the team that day?" "Yes. He was one of the wounded your father helped evacuate. He's been stationed overseas until recently. Just got transferred to Fort Lexington last week." I felt my heart rate quicken. Another connection to my father, another piece of the puzzle. "What does he want?" "To thank you," he says, "and to tell you about your father. Things that weren't in the reports." I closed my eyes, considering. Since the ceremony 6 months ago, I'd been approached by several veterans who'd served with my father, each sharing stories, memories, painting a fuller picture of the man I'd known as Dad, but others had known as Colonel Morgan. Each conversation had been healing in its way, filling in gaps, strengthening my connection to him. "When and where?" "Tomorrow evening. There's a small gathering of veterans at the Anchor downtown. Low-key, just some folks who served together sharing stories. He'll be there, so will I, if you'd like company." "I'd appreciate that," I said. "See you there at 7. After hanging up, I returned to my curriculum materials, but my mind kept drifting to what this Captain Holden might tell me. What new facet of my father might I discover? What piece of him might be returned to me? The following evening, I arrived at the Anchor at precisely 7. The bar was warm and inviting, dark wood, soft lighting, military memorabilia on the walls. It catered to the Fort Lexington crowd, but wasn't exclusively military. A place where uniforms and civilians mingled comfortably. Michael waved from a corner booth where he sat with another man, tall, with close-cropped brown hair and a scar running along his jaw. Captain Holden, I presumed. They both stood as I approached. "Rachel," Michael said warmly. "This is Captain James Holden." "James." "Sergeant First Class Rachel Morgan." "It's an honor," Captain Holden said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, his eyes, hazel, I noticed, direct and sincere. "Your father was an extraordinary man." "Thank you," I replied, sliding into the booth opposite them. "Michael says you were there that day." Holden nodded, his expression solemn. "I was. I'd probably be dead if it wasn't for your father." A server approached, and we paused to order drinks. When she left, Holden continued. "I was a lieutenant then. It was my second deployment. We'd been tracking this HVT, high-value target, for weeks. The intel seemed solid." He shook his head. "Until it wasn't." "My father questioned it," I said. "He did, vehemently. I remember him arguing with Major Granger, Colonel Granger now, I guess, about the source reliability." Holden took a sip of his water. "Granger wouldn't hear it. Said the opportunity might not come again, that we had to move." Our drinks arrived. Beer for the men, whiskey neat for me. My father's drink. I took a small sip, letting the warmth spread through my chest. "When it all went sideways," Holden continued, "your father took charge immediately. Major Granger was hit. Early, not critically, but enough to take him out of command. Everything was chaos, bullets everywhere. No clear extraction plan." He paused, his gaze distant, lost in the memory. "Your father moved from position to position, completely exposed to enemy fire, directing our defense, treating the wounded, calling in coordinates. I'd never seen anything like it. Complete calm in the middle of a storm." "That sounds like him," I said softly. "When the extraction helo was inbound, he organized our withdrawal. I'd been hit in the leg, couldn't walk. He carried me to the extraction point himself. then went back for Granger. Holden's hand tightened around his beer glass. That's when he was hit. Multiple times. He knew the risk. He went anyway. Michael placed a hand on my arm. I hadn't. Realized I was trembling. "I'm sorry," Holden said. "I didn't mean to upset you." "No," I shook my head. "Please, I need to hear this." Holden nodded, continuing more gently. "Before he went back for Granger, he gave me his personal effects. His watch, his wedding ring, a photo of you. 'If I don't make it,' he said, 'make sure my daughter gets these.' I've carried that guilt for 6 years, that I survived and he didn't. It wasn't your fault," I said automatically. "I know that intellectually." He met my eyes. "But hearing about what happened at the ceremony, how the Grangers treated you, I knew I had to come forward to tell you what I saw." "The inquiry cleared Granger," Michael interjected. "The official record states he acted according to protocol." Holden scoffed. "Politics, pure and simple. Everyone who was there knows the truth. Granger ignored valid intelligence concerns, walked us into an ambush, then got himself saved by the very man whose warnings he dismissed." I took another sip of whiskey, letting his words settle. "Did my father say anything else at the end?" Holden's expression softened. "He did. After he got me to the helo, before he went back, he said, 'If anything happens, tell Rachel I'm proud of her. Tell her to keep standing tall.'" Tears welled in my eyes. Those words, so simple, so characteristic of my father, were like his voice reaching across the years, across the void between life and death. "Thank you," I whispered, "for telling me." Holden reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. "I've kept these safe, waiting for the right moment to return them. After I heard what happened at the ceremony, I requested a transfer here specifically to find you." He slid the pouch across the table. With shaking fingers, I opened it and tipped the contents into my palm. My father's watch, its face scratched but still ticking, his wedding ring, a simple gold band, and a worn photograph of me at my high school graduation. Smiling broadly in my cap and gown, my father's arm around my shoulders. "He kept me safe," Holden said quietly. "Now I can finally keep my promise to him." As I held these personal treasures in my hand, I felt a circle closing, a wound healing. These weren't medals or commendations. They were intimate pieces of the man himself, carried into battle, cherished until his final moments. "Captain Holden," I began. "James, please." "James," I amended with a small smile. Would you be willing to speak to my ethics class about integrity in command decisions, about questioning orders when necessary?" He smiled, a genuine, warm expression that transformed his serious face. "I'd be honored, Sergeant Morgan." "Rachel," I corrected. "Rachel," he repeated, our eyes meeting across the table. In that moment, something shifted, subtle as a change in the wind, significant as a change in season. I couldn't name it yet, but I felt it. A new beginning, sprouting from the soil of painful endings. The ethics seminar was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early May. I spent the weekend preparing, organizing my thoughts and coordinating with James, who had agreed to be a guest speaker. Our professional interactions had gradually evolved into something more personal: coffee after meetings, conversations that extended beyond military matters into books, films, shared experiences. I found myself looking forward to seeing him, to the easy rapport we'd developed. He never treated me as Colonel Morgan's daughter or defined me by my father's legacy. To him, I was simply Rachel, a fellow soldier with her own strengths, her own story. The classroom was full when I arrived, 30 young officers in training seated at attention. Their faces reflected the diversity of the modern military. Men, women, various ethnicities, all united by the uniforms they wore and the careers they'd chosen. "Good morning," I began, moving to the front of the room. "Today's session is on ethical decision-making in combat situations. We'll be discussing the tension between following orders and moral judgment, between protocol and principle." I introduced James, who stood at the back of the room. He moved forward, his presence commanding but not intimidating. "Captain Holden will be sharing a case study from his own experience," I continued, "a situation where these tensions became matters of life and death." James thanked me and began his presentation, describing the Afghanistan mission without mentioning names, focusing on the situation, the decisions, the outcomes, rather than the individuals involved. He was a natural speaker, engaging and thoughtful. As he spoke, the door at the back of the classroom opened quietly. I glanced up, expecting a late student. Instead, I saw Linda Granger. My breath caught. She looked different, thinner, her previously perfect appearance now slightly unkempt. She wore civilian clothes, and I wondered briefly how she'd gained access to the base. She stood at the back, arms crossed, listening as James described the mission failure. I maintained my composure, giving no outward indication of my surprise. James continued his presentation, unaware of her presence. When he finished and opened the floor for questions, the cadets engaged enthusiastically, asking thoughtful, probing questions about judgment calls, intelligence reliability, and leadership under pressure. After the final question, as James returned to his seat, Linda stepped forward. "I have a question," she said, her voice instantly recognizable. The room fell silent as heads turned. James looked to me, confusion evident in his expression. I gave him a slight nod. I would handle this. "Mrs. Granger," I acknowledged, keeping my voice neutral, "this is a closed training session." "I heard Captain Holden was speaking today," she replied. "About my husband's mission," one of the cadets whispered to another. Word of the ceremony confrontation had spread throughout the base. Everyone knew who Linda Granger was, what she had done. "Captain Holden was discussing a case study," I said carefully. "No names were used. But we all know what mission he was referring to, don't we?" She stepped further into the room. "The mission where my husband was wounded heroically." James stood. "Mrs. Granger, with respect, that's not an accurate characterization of events." "So you're calling my husband a liar?" Her voice rose slightly. "No, ma'am," James replied calmly. "I'm saying the official record doesn't reflect what happened on the ground." I intervened. "Mrs. Granger, if you'd like to discuss this, we can do so privately after class." "Why? So you can continue poisoning these young officers against Edward?" Her eyes were bright with either anger or unshed tears, perhaps both. "Do they know you're using your father's death to advance your own career?" The accusation hung in the air like a grenade with its pin pulled. I felt the cadet's eyes on me, waiting for my response, for how I would handle this challenge to my authority, my integrity. I took a deep breath, centering myself. This was a teaching moment, though not one I'd planned. "Class," I said, addressing the cadets rather than Linda, "this is an excellent real-time example of what we've been discussing. When emotions run high, when personal stakes are involved, ethical clarity becomes even more crucial." I turned to Linda. "Mrs. Granger, you're welcome to observe the remainder of our session if you can do so respectfully. Otherwise, I'll have to ask you to leave." She stared at me, seemingly caught off guard by my calm response. After a moment, she moved to a chair at the back of the room and sat down, arms still crossed defensively. I continued the class, discussing the principles James had illustrated, connecting them to the broader curriculum on military ethics. Throughout, I was acutely aware of Linda watching me, her expression unreadable. When class ended, the cadets filed out, many stopping to thank James for his presentation. As the room emptied, Linda remained seated, waiting. Once we were alone, she stood and approached us. "You've turned her against me," she said to James, her voice tight. "You and that general." James shook his head. "No one needed to turn Rachel against you, Mrs. Granger. Your actions did that quite effectively." "You don't understand," she said. And for the first time, I heard something beyond anger in her voice. Desperation, perhaps. "Edward is drinking himself to death. He can't sleep. He can't function. Since that ceremony, since you—" She pointed at me. "Since you destroyed everything." "I didn't destroy anything," I said quietly. "I simply refused to let you take what wasn't yours." "Those medals should be part of his legacy," she insisted, but with less conviction than before. "He commanded that mission." "Into disaster," James said flatly. "A disaster Colonel Morgan salvaged at the cost of his life." Linda's composure cracked. "Edward never recovered from that day," she said, her voice breaking. "The guilt has been eating him alive for 6 years. Those medals, I thought if we had them, if they were on our wall somehow, it would fix him." I stared at her, understanding dawning slowly. This wasn't just about status or power. In her own twisted way, Linda had been trying to heal her husband's guilt by claiming my father's medals, as if possessing them would somehow transfer absolution. "Mrs. Granger," I said gently, My father's medals can't absolve your husband. Only the truth can do that. The truth will destroy him completely, she whispered. Then he needs help, James said. Professional help, not medals stolen from a daughter who lost her father. Linda looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time. You look like him. Did you know that? You have his eyes. I said nothing, unsure where this was going. Edward sees him in his nightmares, she continued. Sees him getting hit, falling, over and over. That's not my burden to carry, I said firmly. She nodded slowly. No, it isn't. She straightened her shoulders. I came here to confront you, to tell you how you've ruined our lives. But I see now. It wasn't you. It was never you. Mrs. Granger, I said, your husband needs help. There are programs for veterans struggling with guilt, with PTSD. He wouldn't go, she interrupted. Too proud, always too proud. Then that's his choice, James said, but continuing to blame Rachel to try to take what's hers, that has to stop. Linda looked down at her hands, then back up at me. I'm sorry, she said, the words clearly unfamiliar on her tongue. For the ceremony, for hitting you. It was unforgivable. I didn't immediately respond. Her apology seemed sincere, but years of antagonism couldn't be erased with a few words. Still, I recognized the courage it took for her to come here, to say this. Thank you for saying that, I finally replied. I hope your husband finds peace. She nodded once, then turned and walked out of the classroom. Her shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. James and I stood in silence for a moment after she left. Are you okay? He asked eventually. I think so, I said, surprised to find it was true. That was unexpected. You handled it beautifully, he said. Showed those cadets what real leadership looks like. I smiled at him, grateful for his support, for his presence. Coffee, I suggested. I think we've earned it. As we walked together toward the base cafe, I felt lighter somehow. Linda's apology hadn't erased the pain of the past, but it had shifted something within me. Her revelation about her husband's guilt had humanized him in a way I hadn't expected, hadn't wanted. I didn't forgive them exactly, but I understood them better. And understanding, I was beginning to realize, was its own form of freedom. It was a perfect June evening, the kind that feels suspended in time. Warm, without being hot. The air sweet with honeysuckle. The sky painted in watercolor hues of pink and gold. James and I sat on the patio of Riverfront Bistro, a small restaurant overlooking the James River that had become our regular spot over the past month. Our relationship had evolved organically, naturally, from professional colleagues to friends to something more. We'd been careful, mindful of both, military protocol and our own emotional landscapes, but there was no denying the connection between us, the easy understanding, the shared values, the way conversation flowed without effort. To 6 months of successful seminars, James said, raising his glass of wine to mine. I smiled, clinking my glass against his. I still can't believe the response we've gotten. 3 more bases requesting the program. That's because you've built something meaningful, he replied, something that resonates beyond Fort Lexington. The ethics training program had indeed taken off beyond my expectations. What started as local seminars had expanded to a comprehensive curriculum that was now being implemented at military academies across the country. General Rhodes had been instrumental in championing the program, seeing in it a way to address systemic issues within the chain of command. We built it together, I corrected gently. James had become an integral part of the program, his battlefield experiences providing crucial context to the ethical frameworks I taught. He smiled, the scar along his jaw crinkling slightly. Partners then. The word hung between us, layered with meaning beyond the professional. Our waiter approached with our entrees, grilled salmon for me, steak for James. As we ate, we discussed plans for the next round of seminars, potential expansions, improvements based on cadet feedback. I received an interesting email today, I said after a comfortable lull in conversation, from Edward Granger. James's eyebrows rose in surprise. What did he want? To meet? To talk? I set down my fork. He's been in therapy, apparently, for 3 months now. Since Linda came to the classroom? I nodded. He says he's ready to face the truth about what happened in Afghanistan, ready to make amends, whatever that means. James studied me. How do you feel about that? It was a good question, one I'd been asking myself since receiving the email. Conflicted, I admitted. Part of me doesn't want to give him the time of day, but another part wants closure, James finished for me. Yes, and if he's genuinely trying to change, to heal, you want to honor that effort. I smiled softly. You know me too well already. His hand found mine across the table. I'm still learning, but I like what I've learned so far. The warmth of his fingers around mine grounded me, a tangible reminder that I wasn't facing this or anything alone anymore. I told him I'd meet him, I said, tomorrow afternoon, at the Memorial Garden on base. Would you like me to come with you? I considered it. No, I decided. This is something I need to do myself, but maybe after. I might need to debrief. I'll be there, he promised. Whatever you need. The next day, I arrived at the Memorial Garden 15 minutes early. The space was peaceful. Pathways winding between carefully tended flower beds, benches positioned for quiet reflection, a central monument engraved with the names of fallen soldiers from Fort Lexington. My father's name was among them. I sat on a bench near the monument, watching as other visitors moved quietly through the garden. A young woman with a toddler placing flowers beneath a name, an elderly man standing at attention before the central pillar, a group of soldiers walking silently along the eastern path. At exactly 2 o'clock, Edward Granger appeared at the garden entrance. He was in civilian clothes, khakis and a simple button-down shirt. He looked older than when I'd last seen him, grayer, the lines in his face deeper. He spotted me and walked over, his gait slightly uneven, an old injury or perhaps new ailments, I couldn't tell. Sergeant First Class Morgan, he said formally, stopping a respectful distance from my bench. Thank you for meeting me. Colonel Granger, I acknowledged with a nod. I didn't invite him to sit. He cleared his throat. Former colonel, he corrected. I'm a civilian now. I said nothing. Waiting. I've been in therapy, he began awkwardly. Trauma counseling. After Linda came to your class that day, well, she finally gave me an ultimatum. Get help, or she'd leave. I'm glad you're getting help, I said, meaning it despite myself. It's been illuminating. He glanced at the memorial. And excruciating, facing the truth after burying it for so long. I watched him carefully, looking for signs of insincerity, of manipulation. I saw only exhaustion and a kind of resigned honesty. The thing is, Rachel, may I call you Rachel? I nodded once. The thing is, I've been living with this guilt for 6 years. Your father warned me about the intelligence. He told me it was a trap. But I was so focused on the promotion that would come with capturing that HVT, so convinced of my own judgment. He shook his head. Pride, arrogance. I got my men ambushed, got your father killed, and then spent 6 years trying to bury that truth. Why are you telling me this now? I asked quietly. Because I owe you the truth, and an apology. He met my eyes directly. I am deeply, profoundly sorry for what happened to your father, for my role in his death, for how I treated you. Afterward, for allowing Linda to do what she did at the ceremony. None of it was acceptable. The apology hung in the air between us. I'd imagined this moment many times over the past 6 months, sometimes with rage, sometimes with vindictive satisfaction, but now that it was happening, I felt neither. Just a quiet acknowledgement that this man's journey to this moment had been its own form of justice. What do you want from me? I asked. Nothing, he replied immediately. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just needed you to know that I'm finally facing the truth, that your father was right, that he died because of my mistake, and that I've lived every day since then knowing that. I studied him for a long moment. My father believed in accountability, I said, finally. In owning your actions, good and bad. He would have appreciated this conversation. Granger nodded slowly. He was a better man than I ever was, a better soldier. Yes, I agreed simply. He was. We sat in silence for a moment. The sounds of the garden, birdsong, distant voices, the whisper of leaves in the breeze enveloping us. There's one more thing, Granger said hesitantly. I've written a formal statement correcting the official record of that mission, acknowledging that Colonel Morgan raised valid concerns that I dismissed, that the intelligence failure was my responsibility. It's been submitted to the Department of the Army. I felt my breath catch. That could affect your pension, your benefits. I know. He shrugged slightly. It's time to face the consequences. I didn't know what to say. This was more than I'd expected. more than I'd ever thought to ask for. Not just an apology, but a formal correction of the record. My father's judgment, vindicated officially, his warning, acknowledged. "Thank you," I said finally. Granger nodded, then slowly rose to his feet. "I won't take any more of your time. Thank you for hearing me out." As he turned to leave, found myself saying, "Edward." He paused, looking back. "I hope you find peace," I said, echoing what I'd told his wife months earlier, but this time I meant it differently, not as a dismissal, but as a genuine wish. "Thank you, Rachel," he replied quietly. "I hope you have or will." I watched him walk away, his shoulders straighter than when he'd arrived, as if some burden had been set down, if not fully released. When he was gone, I turned to look at my father's name on the memorial. I traced the engraved letters with my fingertips, feeling the smooth, cool stone beneath my skin. "We got there, Dad," I whispered. "The truth is out. You were right all along." A gentle breeze stirred the garden, carrying the scent of lilacs and freshly cut grass. Somewhere a wind chime sounded. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. 1 year to the day after Linda Granger slapped me in front of 130 witnesses, I stood again in the ceremony hall at Fort Lexington. The annual memorial recognition ceremony had returned, but everything else was different. I wore my dress blues with the insignia of Sergeant First Class, now supplemented by the Military Outstanding Volunteer Service Medal for my ethics program. My father's Bronze Star and Purple Heart were displayed in a special exhibit in the foyer, alongside photographs and personal items from other fallen soldiers, a memorial created with input from families, honoring not just the sacrifice but the individuals who made it. The hall was filled to capacity, dignitaries mingling with service members of all ranks. General Rhodes stood near the podium, speaking with the Secretary of the Army, who had flown in specifically for today's unveiling. James appeared at my side, handsome in his dress uniform. "Nervous?" he asked quietly. "A little," I admitted. "Public speaking was never my strong suit." He smiled. "You've addressed hundreds of cadets. This is no different. Except for the Secretary of the Army and half the Pentagon brass," I muttered. He chuckled. "Details." His hand found mine, squeezing gently before releasing it, the perfect balance of professional decorum and personal support. Our relationship had deepened over the past year, built on mutual respect, shared values, and an understanding that had started with my father, but had grown into something entirely our own. General Rhodes approached the podium, and the murmur of conversation faded. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "welcome to this year's Memorial Recognition Ceremony. Today, we honor not only those who have fallen in service to their country, but also the enduring legacy they leave behind." He spoke eloquently about sacrifice, about duty, about the moral courage required to serve with honor. As he neared the conclusion of his speech, he gestured toward me. "Today, we're privileged to unveil a new initiative, one born from both tragedy and triumph. The Colonel John Morgan Ethics Leadership Program will be implemented across all branches of the armed services, ensuring that future military leaders understand that their most important duty is to the truth and to those under their command." Applause rippled through the hall as I moved forward to join him at the podium. "Sergeant First Class Rachel Morgan has turned personal loss into institutional gain," General Rhodes continued. "Her work ensures that her father's legacy extends far beyond medals or monuments. I can think of no more fitting tribute to Colonel Morgan's memory." More applause as he stepped aside, yielding the podium to me. I looked out over the crowd, fellow soldiers, officers, dignitaries. Among them I spotted Michael Ramirez, his wife Sarah beside him, and surprisingly, in the very back row, Edward and Linda Granger. They had returned to Virginia recently, I'd heard. Edward had found work teaching history at a local high school after his military retirement became official. I took a deep breath and began. "A year ago I stood in this hall clutching my father's medals, defending not just physical objects, but the principles they represent: honor, integrity, truth. Today, I'm proud to announce a program that will embed those principles into the very fabric of military education." I outlined the components of the program, case studies drawn from real field experiences, ethical decision-making frameworks, leadership scenarios that challenged conventional thinking. As I spoke, I saw heads nodding, expressions of engagement and approval. My father once told me that honor isn't given, it's guarded. This program aims to create leaders who understand that guarding honor means speaking truth to power, questioning orders that contradict core values, and placing the welfare of those under their command above personal advancement. I glanced toward the back of the hall where the Grangers sat. Edward met my gaze steadily, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. His formal correction of the mission record had indeed cost him financially, but it had given him something more valuable, the beginning of redemption. The Colonel John Morgan Ethics Leadership Program isn't about my father alone, I continued. It's about all. Those who serve with integrity, who make difficult choices in impossible situations, who understand that true leadership isn't measured by rank, but by moral courage. As I concluded my remarks, I felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with public humiliation had transformed into public recognition, not just of my father's sacrifice, but of the principles he'd lived by. Principles that would now shape generations of military leaders. The applause was sustained and genuine as I stepped away from the podium. General Rhodes shook my hand, then surprised me by pulling me into a brief embrace. "John would be so proud," he whispered before releasing me. The ceremony continued with the unveiling of a plaque commemorating the program's establishment, followed by a reception in the adjacent hall. I moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, discussing implementation details with interested officers, introducing James to those who didn't know him. As the evening wound down, I found myself alone for a moment, near the memorial display in the foyer. My father's medals gleamed under the subtle lighting. His photograph, the official military portrait I'd always found too stiff, too formal to capture his warmth, positioned above them. "It's a wonderful tribute," a voice said behind me. I turned to find Linda Granger standing a respectful distance away, her husband beside her. "Thank you," I replied, my tone neutral but not cold. "We wanted to congratulate you," Edward said. "The program, it's important work." I nodded. "It is." An awkward silence fell. There was history between us that couldn't be erased, wounds that would always leave scars, but the acute pain had faded, replaced by something like understanding. "We won't keep you," Linda said finally. "We just wanted to pay our respects." As they turned to leave, I found myself saying, "Thank you for coming." They paused, looking back at me with surprise. "It matters," I added. "That you're here, that you see this." Edward nodded once, understanding the significance. "Your father's legacy is in good hands," he said. "The best hands." After they left, James found me still standing by the display. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. "Everything is as it should be." We walked together out of the ceremony hall, into the cool evening air. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, each one a pinpoint of light against the vast canvas of night. "What now?" James asked, his shoulder brushing mine as we walked. I smiled up at him. "Dinner? I'm starving." He laughed. "I meant more generally. You've achieved what you set out to do. Your father's legacy is secured. The program is launched. What's next for Rachel?" "Morgan?" I considered the question as we walked toward the parking area. The past year had been focused on establishing the ethics program, on channeling my grief and anger into something constructive. I hadn't thought much beyond that immediate goal. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Continue the work. Expand it, maybe. And—" I glanced at him. "See where this goes." His smile deepened. "I like the sound of that." As we reached his car, he paused, turning to face me directly. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I've been waiting for the right moment." He pulled out a small box, not velvet like the one that had held my father's medals, but worn leather, clearly old. "This was your father's," he said, opening it to reveal a compass. "He lent it to me the night before that mission. Said it had never failed him, and he wanted me to have it for luck." He held it out to me. "I think it's time it came back to the Morgan family." I took the compass with trembling fingers. The case was scratched and dented, bearing the marks of years of use. When I opened it, the needle swung true north immediately, steady and unwavering. "He carried this through 3 deployments," I said softly, recognizing it from countless camping trips, hiking adventures. "Said as long as you knew which way was true north, you could always find your way home." "He was right," James said, "and now it's yours." I closed the compass carefully, holding it tight in my palm. "Thank you." for keeping it safe all these years, for bringing it home. James's eyes held mine, warm and certain. That's what we do, isn't it? Keep faith with those who came before, guard what matters. I nodded, understanding completely. Honor isn't given, I quoted. It's guarded. As we drove away from Fort Lexington, the compass rested in my hand, a tangible connection to my father. But it was more than that now. It was a symbol of the direction I'd found, the path forward that honored his. Memory not through vengeance or bitterness, but through continuing his work, his values, his legacy of integrity. The slap that had once seemed to echo through my life had faded to insignificance. What remained was the truth, finally acknowledged. What remained was honor, finally guarded. What remained was a path forward, illuminated by the best of what had come before. True north, I whispered to myself as Fort Lexington receded in the distance behind us. The future stretched ahead, unwritten but full of purpose. My father's voice seemed to whisper back, "Stand tall, Rachel. I'm proud of you."